If you are watching this on March 23rd, 2026, and you were going about your normal day thinking the world was operating somewhere in the range of manageable chaos, I need you to stop right now. Close whatever else you have open. Put down whatever you are doing. Because what I am about to tell you is the kind of news that rewrites the rules overnight. And I mean that in the most literal and serious way possible. A United States Navy destroyer is gone. Not damaged, not retreating to port for repairs, not involved in some near miss that got exaggerated in the media. Gone, sitting on the floor of the Red Sea, and the nation that put it there is Iran. Let that sentence land completely before we go any further. For the first time since the Second World War, the United States Navy has lost a combat warship in active battle. The last time an American destroyer went down fighting, the year was 1945. Harry Truman was sitting in the Oval Office. The atomic bomb had not yet been used. Germany had just surrendered weeks earlier. And now, 80 years later, in waters that the entire global economy depends on every single day, that history has been violently repeated. If you think that is just a military statistic, you have not yet understood what this moment actually means. By the time this video is finished, you will. Let me give you the full picture of what happened, because the sequence of this attack is as important as the outcome. And understanding how it was executed tells you something deeply uncomfortable about the state of American military vulnerability in 2026. The destroyer was operating in the Red Sea corridor, which is one of the most strategically critical stretches of water anywhere on Earth. It is the route connecting the Suez Canal to the Indian Ocean. Every single day, an enormous volume of global trade, energy shipments, consumer goods, raw materials, all of it flows through those waters on its way between Europe, Asia, and the rest of the world. For months now, that corridor has been the site of an escalating campaign of attacks against commercial and military shipping. But what happened to this destroyer was not another harassment operation. This was a fully coordinated military strike, executed with a level of precision and sophistication that the Pentagon did not publicly believe Iran had achieved at this scale. The attack came in deliberate, layered waves, each one designed to set up the next. It began with electronic jamming, sophisticated interference directed at the destroyer's radar systems and its communication links to nearby Allied assets. The goal was not to destroy anything yet. The goal was to blind the ship, to cut it off, to isolate it in the seconds before the real assault began. Then came the drones, dozens of them. And here is the detail that reveals just how carefully this operation was planned. Not all of those drones were armed. Some of them were decoys, purpose-built to look threatening enough that the ship's close-in weapon systems and interceptor missiles would engage them, depleting the defensive ammunition supply against targets that were never intended to cause damage. Iran was engineering the conditions for the kill shot before the kill shot was ever fired. When the destroyer's defenses had been sufficiently worn down, when the radar picture was degraded and the interceptor load was reduced, then came the actual strike. A fast, sea-skimming anti-ship missile traveling at speeds that gave the crew less than 15 seconds from the moment it broke over the radar horizon to the moment of impact. 15 seconds. That is not enough time to execute a counter-response. That is barely enough time to sound a general alarm and for crew members to understand that something catastrophic is about to happen. The missile struck the destroyer below the waterline on its port side, tearing the hull open. A second missile hit the superstructure seconds later. The fires that followed were beyond what the crew could control. The ship went down. Now here is where this story moves from devastating to genuinely alarming, in a way that goes beyond the immediate tragedy. This attack was not improvised. This was not a militia getting lucky on a good day with whatever weapons they had available. The level of coordination, the intelligence about the ship's position and defensive status, the precise sequencing of jamming, followed by decoy drones, followed by the anti-ship strike, all of it points to a degree of planning and technical capability that raises immediate and serious questions about who helped make this possible. The United States military and intelligence community are working at maximum intensity right now to reconstruct exactly what information was available to Iranian commanders in the hours before this attack, who provided it, and through what channels. The early signals emerging from defense circles are deeply troubling. There are indications that real-time satellite targeting data may have been shared with Iranian planners shortly before the strike was executed. Not from some rogue hacker, not from a non-state actor with a laptop, from a state, a powerful one with the satellite architecture to generate that kind of targeting intelligence. If that assessment is confirmed in the days ahead, this conflict will have entered a dimension of great power proxy warfare that changes everything about how Washington has to think about what it is actually facing. The casualty numbers from this attack represent the largest single incident loss of American military life in the Middle East in more than 2 decades. The Pentagon has confirmed sailors were killed. Full casualty figures are still being compiled as of the latest available information, with family notifications still ongoing. The carrier strike group operating in the region responded immediately. Additional destroyers repositioned. A guided missile cruiser moved to defensive formation. F-18 aircraft launched from the carrier deck within minutes of the attack being confirmed. But by the time those jets were airborne and on station, there was nothing left to engage. The Iranian fast boats that had participated in the operation had already scattered. The drone swarm had been expended. The missile platforms that fired the kill shot had repositioned or gone dark. The attack was specifically designed to deliver maximum damage and then vanish before any meaningful counterattack could be organized. That is not an accident of timing. That is the doctrine. Hit with precision, hit with lethality, and then disappear into the operational environment before the superpower can organize a response. It is asymmetric warfare executed at its highest level of sophistication. And this is what makes the situation so fundamentally different from any military confrontation the United States has faced in recent memory. Iran did not challenge America with a conventional fleet. Iran did not attempt to match American naval power with equivalent naval power, which it could not do and which it knows it cannot do. Instead, it did something far more dangerous and far more difficult to answer. It found the gaps, the seams between detection and response, between electronic capability and physical defense, between the time a threat is identified and the time an interceptor can be positioned to meet it. And it exploited those gaps with a patience and technical precision that the Pentagon's threat assessment models had apparently underestimated. The question that every analyst, every military commander, every foreign minister, and every head of government on Earth is now asking simultaneously is the same one. What does the United States do next? And there is no clean answer. The first option that will be argued for loudly inside the Pentagon and on Capitol Hill is a massive retaliatory strike. American cruise missiles and aircraft targeting Iranian naval infrastructure, missile storage sites, command and control facilities. The military capability to execute that kind of response exists without question. The domestic political pressure to respond with overwhelming force after losing a warship and the sailors aboard it is enormous, and it is understandable. American blood has been spilled in the most visible and undeniable way. American military hardware is sitting on the ocean floor. The demand for a forceful response will be heard from every direction in Washington. But hiding directly behind that first option is the scenario that keeps every serious strategist awake at night. If the United States launches direct strikes against Iranian territory, not against a proxy force, not against a militia operating in Yemen or Iraq, but against the Islamic Republic of Iran on its own soil, then every strategic calculation across the entire region changes simultaneously and irreversibly. Iran has agreements, alliances, and operational understandings with actors in Lebanon, Yemen, Iraq, Syria, and elsewhere. A direct American military strike on Iranian territory does not stay a bilateral confrontation between Washington and Tehran for long. Within 72 hours of such a strike, the conflict has the realistic potential to become a multi-front regional war involving actors from multiple directions at once, each with their own grievances, their own weapons, and their own reasons to escalate further. And then there is the Strait of Hormuz question, which is the economic dimension of this crisis that most news coverage will underemphasize. 20% of the entire world's daily oil supply moves through that narrow channel of water between Iran and Oman. Every barrel of oil that the Gulf states produce and export passes through that strait. If Iran decides in response to American military action that it will mine the strait or position naval and missile assets to threaten or block commercial transit, the global economy does not experience a slowdown, it experiences a seizure. Oil prices would spike to levels that financial markets have not seen in modern history. The inflation pressures that governments around the world have been struggling to manage for the past several years would look trivial compared to the economic shock that a Hormuz closure would generate. Every country that imports oil, which is most of the world, would face immediate and severe economic consequences. Supply chains that are already under stress from the ongoing trade disputes and the disruptions of the past year would face an additional shock that many businesses and industries are not positioned to absorb. This is not theoretical modeling for a distant scenario. These are the specific calculations that energy economists, naval strategists, and national security advisors are running right now in real time as they try to advise decision makers on what a response to this attack actually costs in its fullest sense. The timing of this attack is also not coincidental, and it would be a serious analytical mistake to treat it as if it were. Iran made this move at a specific moment that was chosen with strategic deliberation. American domestic politics are deeply fractured on the question of further military involvement in the Middle East. NATO allies are consumed with the security situation in Europe and are not positioned to enthusiastically support a major escalation in the Gulf. China and Russia are both watching this situation with intense interest, not because they are passive observers, but because how America responds to the loss of this destroyer will directly inform their own strategic calculations about what is possible in Taiwan and Ukraine, respectively. If Washington's response is perceived as hesitant or limited by the constraints of escalation risk, every adversary on the planet updates their threat assessment of what they can get away with. If Washington responds with overwhelming force and the region ignites into a broader war, then American military and economic attention becomes consumed in the Middle East, at exactly the moment when other theaters are demanding focus. Iran did not pick this timing randomly. Iran picked it because the constraints on American freedom of action have rarely been greater or more visible. The nuclear dimension of this crisis deserves more attention than it is currently receiving in most media coverage. The Iran that just sank an American destroyer is simultaneously the Iran that has advanced its uranium enrichment program further than at any point in its history, following the collapse of the JCPOA framework. The diplomatic architecture that was designed to constrain Iran's nuclear ambitions has broken down. The combination of demonstrated conventional military aggression at this scale and a nuclear program approaching weapons-relevant capability is precisely the scenario that defense planners have identified as the most dangerous possible configuration. The hardliners within the Iranian political establishment will point to what happened in the Red Sea as proof that their military doctrine is correct and effective. They will argue that Iran confronted the most powerful military force in human history and drew blood in a way that will be recorded in history. That narrative carries enormous internal political weight in Tehran. It strengthens exactly the voices that are least interested in diplomatic off-ramps and most committed to continued confrontation. Any American response that does not fundamentally alter Iran's strategic calculus risks accelerating that internal dynamic rather than reversing it. Allied governments are already reacting to what happened. British naval assets in the region have been placed on heightened alert status. France has recalled its ambassador from Tehran for emergency consultations. Israel, which has its own complex and ongoing direct confrontation with Iran, is recalibrating its threat assessments and its own potential next moves in real time. Saudi Arabia, which sits across the Persian Gulf from Iran, and whose entire oil export economy depends on the Strait of Hormuz remaining open, has gone noticeably quiet. That silence from Riyadh communicates more than any statement would. The United Nations Security Council has convened an emergency session, but as anyone who follows geopolitics understands, the Security Council is where statements are delivered and vetoes are cast. Russia and China will block any resolution that authorizes direct military action against Iran. The diplomatic path through the UN serves a purpose in terms of international optics, but it will not resolve the immediate military and strategic emergency that Washington is confronting right now. What the United States Navy's loss of a warship in active combat actually represents, beyond the human tragedy and the immediate military crisis, is a signal about the new reality of military power in 2026. The U.S. Navy remains the most powerful maritime force in the history of human civilization. Nobody with any serious understanding of military capability is challenging that statement. But what this attack proved, in the most brutal and undeniable terms possible, is that raw power does not equal invulnerability. It proved that a technologically capable and strategically patient adversary, willing to absorb the risk of retaliation, and willing to invest years in developing asymmetric capabilities specifically designed to exploit the gaps in American defensive systems, can still inflict historic damage. The conversations happening inside the Pentagon right now are conversations that have not been necessary for 80 years. How do you respond to the loss of a warship? What does proportionality actually look like in this context? What signals can you send that are forceful enough to restore deterrence without triggering the exact escalation spiral that every rational actor wants to avoid? None of these are easy questions. None of them have quick answers. And the decisions that come out of Washington in the next 72 hours will shape the trajectory of this conflict and of American strategic credibility for years to come. The post-World War II international order, the rules and red lines and norms that have prevented direct great power combat for 8 decades, is under more pressure right now in the waters of the Red Sea than at any point in recent memory. History is not something that is happening somewhere else to someone else. It is happening right now, and the sailors who were lost deserve to have the world understand exactly what their sacrifice revealed about the moment we are living in.